Hi, everyone. My name's Nacole Riccaboni. I'm an acute care nurse practitioner. I've had that role for about 3 years, but I've been in critical care for 10 years as a registered nurse. Today, I get to interview the amazing Dr. Dalton-Smith about the types of rest, and we can't wait to hear your background, Dr. Dalton-Smith.
Yes, Saundra Dalton-Smith. I'm an internal medicine physician. I've been in practice for about 20 years now. I do a combination of both inpatient and outpatient, and mom of two boys, and living in healthcare like most of you, trying to make it all work.
Nice. Now, can you explain the types of rest that you refer to in your
Yeah, so
article?
in my book, Sacred Rest, I talk about seven different types of rest. It was during I really came across this work during a time when my kids were toddlers and I burned out. So, you've got two little ones at home, you're taking care
Yeah.
of people all day long. You leave the office or the hospital, whichever one, you get in the door and you're really have nothing left, is what I remember telling my husband one day. I gave it all at the hospital with everyone else. And
Yeah.
so it was during that season that I had to find a way to not feel so drained and exhausted when I came home. And those seven types of rest came out of that. Those seven
Awesome.
types include physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, social, sensory, and creative types
Oh,
of
nice.
rest.
Nice. Now, how would a nurse know which one that he or she needs at any given time?
Well, that's the thing. I think oftentimes, especially in healthcare, it's very easy to get in the habit of saying, I'm tired or I'm
Very true.
exhausted. I mean, honestly, we pour out a lot
Yeah.
in any day, long before we ever get home. And so the problem with that is when we say we're tired, we're not actually specific or intentional enough in restoring the place where that fatigue is at.
Mhm.
And so, in looking at those seven types of rest, I think the first thing is just to understand what those seven types are. And
Yeah.
that actually helps nurses usually get a better sense of, oh, that's the kind of tired I am. That would really probably be my hope for anyone listening to our panel today and our discussion is to be able to identify what kind of fatigue are you? What is it that
Yeah.
needs to be poured back into? So the very first type is physical. When you're looking at physical rest, we're looking at two different components because physical rest includes those passive types of rest like sleeping and napping, which
Gotcha.
we all know we need to get better sleep. I mean, if
Yeah.
you're in any type of healthcare setting where you're on call or you're working long shifts,
Yeah.
then sleep deprivation is a part of it. We understand that. So
Yeah.
that's passive physical rest. Then, under physical rest, we also have active components.
Okay.
The active component of physical rest are those things that actually help our muscles feel relaxed, help restore our circulation. So, if you're an ICU nurse and you are rolling a patient that's 300 pounds every couple of hours and
Yeah.
changing things, and all that goes into that, helping patients get in and out of beds, that's a physical strain on the body. And so you need to be aware of the work that you actually do with your muscles.
Mhm.
Because, especially if you're a mom of young
Yeah.
kids as well, you get home and you've lifted people all day long, maybe with support, but it's still work. You're still
Yeah.
using those muscles. Then you get home to a 35-pound toddler who mommy, 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 or daddy, daddy, daddy wants to be lifted up. That's more weight you're lifting.
Mhm.
Now, if I told anyone to go to a gym and lift 30 pounds or 200 pounds, they would think, oh, yeah, I need to stretch because my neck hurts, my back hurts. But oftentimes in healthcare, we don't actually think about all of the lifting that we've done throughout the day. Then we wonder why we have neck, back, and shoulder pain.
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
so that's part of the active type of physical rest, those things that relax the muscles. So whether it's, neck rolls or yoga, stretching exercises, massage therapy, self
Nice.
massage, leisure walks, all of those things are restoring the blood flow to those areas so that they can heal, they can repair, they can get restored. So then we have things like mental rest, and
Mhm.
that's the ability to actually clear your mental space. I think sometimes when we lay down to go to sleep at night, we're thinking about all the things, the to-do list, what you have going on that you got to remember for
Yeah,
the
your
next
mind
day.
races.
Yeah, your mind is actually kind of ruminating over
Mhm.
information. So it's very difficult to actually go to sleep and to get into some of those deeper levels of non-REM sleep that are restorative. And so we have to have some kind of strategies in place to be able to clear our mind. And, a very simple one would be doing what we call brain dumping or mind dumping, where
Oh.
you, instead of trying to keep that mental list in your head,
Mhm.
jot it down on a piece of paper, a notepad, post-it note, the back of an envelope, doesn't really matter.
Oh.
Is when you take it out of your head and put it on something concrete, it gives the brain permission then to let it go. So
Oh,
you're not
wow.
feeling responsible for it.
I like that
Um,
idea.
Another type of rest that's really important for nurses and those in healthcare would be emotional rest. It's particularly over the past year, there's a lot of emotions attached to the role of being in healthcare.
Oh, yeah.
Oftentimes, you're the person that's there at the bedside when horrible things happen,
So
or
true.
somebody comes in afraid and you're having to be a support system for them. And then the past year didn't make it any easier when people couldn't have their families available to them at
Yeah.
times, even. So there's an emotional labor that comes with the role of healthcare where you're standing in the ICU with somebody who's on their last couple of hours, and you haven't lost your humanity in that moment. So sometimes that might be a patient that you've been with for weeks
Yeah.
and you've grown attached to them in some way. Sometimes that patient may be someone who is outside of the hospital. It
Yeah,
might be a
that's
friend of
true.
somebody.
Yeah.
And so you disassociate your emotions for a moment due to the professionalism. And so, because you understand that crying right then is not actually going to be beneficial to the patient or the family. So we have learned how to take on the emotional labor of the job, the professional emotional labor of a role, of the job that we're doing. That doesn't negate the need for those emotions to be addressed and acknowledged. And
Oh,
it's
well
been a
said.
very challenging year, for a lot of people, in part because sometimes the person on the other end of that bed in this season is a colleague
Mhm.
or a family or a physician you worked with or another nurse, that has contracted COVID, and now you're having to watch them, go through this process.
Yeah.
And so it's important to recognize the emotional labor of that
Mhm.
and the need for emotional rest by having some safe place where you feel okay to release those emotions. And, I think one thing to keep in mind is that with that, it doesn't mean emotional dumping because none of us want to go home and emotionally dump what we've experienced onto our spouses or onto our girlfriends who are not in healthcare or anything like that.
Yeah.
You're not going there telling them the gore of what happens in healthcare. The
Right.
world cannot, the majority of the world cannot deal with that. That's
Correct.
why we are the ones that are in the profession. We've made the conscious choice
Mhm.
of going into dark places with people. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to deal with those emotions. So when you're sharing and having those emotional rest moments with people, you're not sharing the trauma or dumping the trauma and the gore. You're simply being authentic about your feelings.
Oh,
So
nice.
a
Nice.
way
I
of
like that.
doing that, you get home, your spouse may say, "How was your day?" You don't go into, "Oh, you should have saw," and go into the gore of it because they honestly they can't deal with that. That's traumatic for some
Right.
people.
Yeah.
So what you want to share is it was a rough day. I had a patient I really was connected with. I lost a patient today. It was a rough day.
Mhm.
And you get to acknowledge the pain. You might even cry in the moment.
Yeah.
You may have a tear slide down your face, whatever it is, but you are giving yourself permission to go back into the humanity of the work that we do. Because I
Makes
found for
sense.
myself, this was the type of rest I was most missing.
Me too.
I had
Yeah.
learned how to stand there at the bedside of patients who I knew their dog's name, I knew their grandkids, seen all the pictures.
Yeah.
These people I've been treating forever. And
Mhm.
then we get to the end of 20 years of practice, you're with people for a long time.
I bet.
You get to that ER or ICU bedside, and in that moment, I'm Dr. Dalton Smith. I'm not the person that they've been, in the grocery store with hugging and those kind of things.
Mhm.
I'm the person who's got to be able to make hard decisions, call the code if necessary, whatever
Mhm.
it is. And I can't burst into tears right then because it's not serving my nursing staff
Very
for me
true.
to do
Very
that,
true. Very
nor
true.
is it serving the patient. But that doesn't mean I'm not still feeling the pain. So I
Yeah.
have to have those times of emotional rest where I can deal with that.
Nice. I like that one. What are your other ones?
Well, one of the ones I think oftentimes that we don't look at in healthcare is creative rest. Healthcare is
Yes.
one of those professions where we automatically think of it as being very scientific and kind of black
Yes.
and white, and there's not a lot of creativity. But that is so untrue.
Mhm.
If you've ever had a situation where things have gotten short, like they have lately, and you're having to come up with ways to do more with less, you're
Mhm.
using creative energy. You're having to be innovative. You're having to
Okay.
think outside of the box. You've got, X number of nurses and way more patients than that X number of nurses
Oh,
can have
yes,
to
for
take
sure.
care of. And you're still having to take care of them. So
Yeah.
you're having to be creative with, who's going to lunch when? Are we going to eat? Or, where are we going to get food from? You got to
Yeah.
be
Very
creative in how you're
true.
going to keep everybody healthy to
Yeah.
actually take care of these people, how you're going to
Yeah.
even get all the staffing done. So there's a lot of creative energy that we use in healthcare, but we don't realize that creative that it's actually being creative, that
Yeah.
having to come up with ways to do things when you don't feel like you have all the resources,
Yeah.
when you're having to think outside of the box, you're having to make things work. All of that creativity can make you feel drained. The
For
use of
sure.
that, pouring out of that creative bucket without a way of pouring back in. And creative rest is the rest we experience when we allow ourselves to appreciate beauty in whatever form, when we allow
Okay.
ourselves to be inspired, to be awestruck by something.
Mhm.
And it's interesting that a lot of people experience creative rest through nature, and a
Oh,
lot of people
nice.
get it through bodies of water. So if you've ever had the experience of, looking at a body of water or being at the water side and you're like, I don't know, I just feel more at peace and more,
Yeah.
connected here. That's what creative
Yeah.
rest looks like. And the great thing about the research with that is you don't actually have to be physically at the place to experience that. They did studies where people who said they experienced creative rest, at the ocean, where they looked at the actual ocean.
Mhm.
Then they did an MRI of the brain to see what activity occurred.
Mhm.
Then they had people look at pictures of the ocean and did MRIs to check the brain activity. Then they had people look at colors that represented the ocean, like the aquas and the blues and all of that. And then they
Mhm.
checked the brain activity. The activity in those people who said they experienced creative rest with water were the same, regardless of if it was actual ocean, a
Oh,
picture, or
wow.
even colors. Those who didn't have it got no activity. So for
Nice.
those people who feel that, that's one of the beauty of it. If you have
Nice.
a laptop computer or that you have maybe that you're working with as a nurse and you
Yeah.
have any ability to put any type of imagery on it, like it's a lock
Oh, your
screen,
desktop. Yeah.
pick something that's actual creative rest for you.
Oh,
Whether
cool.
that's a picture of the beach, your favorite vacation spot, picture of flowers, picture of something your child drew. That's the thing with each of these types of rest. You get to make it as personalized as necessary for you to get the benefit from it.
Oh, that sounds great.
Some other types of rest to be aware of include sensory rest,
Okay.
which is the rest we experience when we allow ourselves to downgrade our sensory inputs.
Okay.
That could include anything from uh, honestly downgrading the social notifications on your phone. A
Oh,
lot of
nice. Good
us,
idea.
we have a lot of notifications on our devices, and then
Yes.
you have the smart watches where
Oh,
if
yeah.
your phone dings or pings, then your watch
Watch.
buzzes.
Yeah.
And that's the same type of sensory input, as being on call.
Mhm.
Because
Oh,
the
yeah.
second you get that little ding or ping, you're like, "Ooh, who needs me or what's happening?" And even if it's insignificant,
Mhm.
that little bit of cortisol release that comes from that kind of hit of adrenaline from, oh, who is that, is unnecessary.
Yeah.
If you think about our roles within healthcare, they're stressful enough without then adding the stress of that notification on top of it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when it goes off, we don't know most of the time, is it the school calling about our kids? Is it something happening at home? Or is it just a friend who wants to let that Starbucks has lattes on sale today, Because those are the
Pumpkin
kind of
spice.
notifications my friends send. So you really need to be in control of that. And I'm not saying get rid of apps because that's not realistic in our society. What I'm saying is take back control of how you engage with some of the apps. So,
Said.
most of us, the only notifications we need are on are the actual phone, the cell phone, and the text message. Because if the school or the daycare, whatever it is, really was trying to reach you, they're not going to send a message on social media. They're going to call
True.
you like in a real set situation, like a phone or a text message. And then you can still use social media and have those things on your phone, but rather than them having the ability to intrude upon your day and upon your peace at any given time, you get to control when you engage with them. You
Perfect.
choose when you want to look at Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever it is. You can open the app and go into it, but it can't just necessarily assume your attention whenever it feels like it.
Nice. Nice. Awesome. And I think you have one more, right?
There's two more.
Two
Spiritual
more. Oh,
rest.
nice.
Spiritual rest really deals with each. It's different for each person. So
Yeah.
it deals with how you feel kind of interconnected with the world. And so
Oh,
some people experience that through a faith-based system.
yeah.
Some people feel that through different communities. We all
Mhm.
have that sense of needing to feel like our life has purpose and value,
For
that we
sure.
belong and that we're accepted. And so every person has to kind of interpret that for themselves.
Mhm.
And then the last type of rest is social rest. And that's the
Mm,
rest we experience around life giving people. Most of
okay.
our time in healthcare is spent around people who need things from us.
Mhm.
And we have to recognize that those people are not just the patients and the people that we're working with, the coworkers and other healthcare team members, but also our family is often
Yes.
socially pulling from us.
Mhm.
So it's not that they're negative people,
Mhm.
it's that the nature of the relationship is you're giving and they're receiving. So then we have to be aware of the importance of having people in our lives that are actually pouring back into us, who don't need anything from us. And what we're finding is most of the statistics show that many adults have fewer adult friends now than ever.
Yeah. I
Long
agree.
before
Yeah,
the
yeah.
isolations and pandemics, they just, our time was spent work, family, try to get some sleep.
Mhm.
No time for those relationships that actually are feeding us.
Mhm.
And so you do need to be aware of the importance of being fed within some of your relationships. And if you're a couple, that's one of the places where you can get both emotional and social rest.
Yeah.
So, as a couple, you are pulling from each other, you need things from each other just within living in a household together,
Mhm.
but you can also be each other's emotional and social rest because you can take moments where, as I mentioned, you're sharing about your day. And if you're the person who's listening to that, the challenge is to not feel like you have to solve the problem or come up with an
Right.
answer, because the emotional rest does not come in you talking, giving an explanation for the or the answer to the person, but being a safe place for them to release and express their feelings. On the
Perfect.
social rest side of that is that you are in a situation where you are being able to receive what you're needing from
Mhm.
that person.
Nice. Now, how would someone go about determining which type of rest they need the most?
Yeah, that's really where my quiz came from at restquiz.com. That
Oh,
was the number
nice.
one question people ask. So we have a full assessment. It's a free assessment anyone can take at
Nice.
restquiz.com. Very simple. And what it does is it gives you a score for each of the 7 types of rest.
Mhm.
Another way of doing that would be to look at your day, to look at where is it you feel the most exhausted with your job. So if you notice that, you're good with going back and forth with patients, let's say at the beginning of the day, but so you're filling, you're filling up their waters, you're having chats with them at the bedside, you're joking around with them, and then towards the end of the day, you're like, I hate people, I hate all people, just get about my face. You know, you're probably draining
Yeah.
emotional or social rest because those are the two that deal with people. And
Yeah.
as you drain a certain type of rest, you're more likely to become defensive
Mhm.
and you're more likely to become a kind of angry from
Mhm.
it or
Makes
resentful of
sense.
it. Another way of looking at that, if you find that beginning of the day you feel good in your body, you don't have anything hurting, The end of the day, your neck hurts, your back hurts, your feet swell, everything's off.
Mhm.
That's a physical rest deficit that you're
Mhm.
mainly dealing with. If you find out you start off the day, you feel like you're not forgetting anything, you're getting all your charts done, you're getting everything logged.
Mhm.
End of the day, you're feeling like, did I get that blood pressure pill? Did I remember to put it in the computer? Did I log that? Mental rest.
Yeah.
In other words, your mind's so split in so many different ways that you're not actually being able to concentrate. And you're not
Gotcha.
actually being able to remember if you did all the things that you needed to do. So you can actually look at the end of the day, what is most off?
Mhm.
Because that's what you're draining. That's the one for you that you're draining the quickest. And often the reason an area gets drained is because that's the one that was already low before you started.
Mhm. That makes sense. Now, how would a nurse apply these specific types of rest in their kind of professional career?
Yeah, so there's just within my own nursing staff, I've watched them kind of do some different things that I hadn't necessarily thought about for ways to get some of these different types of rest. For
Mhm.
example, physical rest. As I mentioned, a lot of
Yeah.
nurses are using a lot of neck, back, and upper arm strength with the different things they're doing with patients, even
Mhm.
if they're not necessarily, in ICU or something where they're having to lift and move patients,
Mhm.
just supporting patients when they try to go to the restroom or different things. And I know sometimes nursing staff will say, well, the CNAs are doing that. Well, what I'm noticing, to keep it
Yeah.
real, but
Yeah, very true.
what I'm noticing though, because there's such a shortage,
Yes.
is that RNs are having to do some of that because we don't have enough CNAs to do it right now.
Mhm.
So they're doing some of these things that they aren't used to necessarily doing,
Mhm.
in some hospitals. And so I see, particularly, I noticed some of our nurses started to, as I saw them walk down the hall, they'll be doing like these neck rolls and neck shrugs. So they're like actively doing
Oh, good idea.
some active physical rest as they're transitioning from one room to the next. Like they'll be
Nice.
standing in the hall, like working out the kinks before they walk into the room.
They're getting
And
ready.
yeah, so this is the thing. What we normally do is, and in healthcare, we tend to do this a lot. We tell our body to shut up. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, my neck hurts, but I got three more patients to see. So I'm not
Mhm.
even going to address the discomfort I'm feeling until I leave after that 10, 12-hour shift.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is if you address the tension in the neck on the third hour when you
Mhm.
first felt it, and actually start releasing some of it, doing that shoulder shrug or pull your head over or whatever it is, start trying to release a little bit of it, then it won't be as tight by the time you get to the 12th hour.
Yeah,
When
that's
you
true.
completely ignore it, by the time you get to the 12th hour, it's spasming, it's you
Yeah,
got a
it gets way
headache.
worse. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
actually significantly more
Oh.
difficult to release that muscle because we try to ignore it all day long. So that's just an example of physical rest, just doing some small
Mhm.
stretching and self massage and type things like that, just as you're kind of transitioning throughout the day. For mental rest, if you're noticing that you have a hard time and you're getting forgetful about certain things. One
Mhm.
of the things that many of the nurses I've worked with have said have been very helpful to them is to actually have like what do they call it? Like I call it a notepad, but just kind of
Mhm.
some place that they're going to keep a little log of certain things. And
Oh,
so if
nice.
your hospital is fully virtual, or not virtual, but fully telemed, or
Mhm.
that's not the right word, electronic, that's the word I'm
There you
looking for,
go. Yeah, you're
electronic
fine. I know what you mean.
documentation, so
Yeah.
that everything is recorded electronically and you don't have like clipboards like we used to have in the past. Whereas, you gave the patient the pill, you could check it off on the clipboard.
Yeah.
What I'm finding is sometimes if, especially in certain situations, I'll just use my own hospital, one patient's computer might not be working in their room so that you could
Mhm.
log it real time. And so you're having to keep that information. If you're logging it on something concrete, it keeps your brain from feeling like it has to
Mhm.
keep that information. So sometimes
Nice.
something as simple as I've seen a lot of our nurses will just have a piece of paper out of the copier,
Mhm.
blank white piece of paper. They fold it over. They write down the room numbers of the patients that they're needing to give AM meds to. Once they give whatever the meds are, they check off
Mhm.
that number. Doesn't have any patient identifier, doesn't have the medicine, doesn't have anything that's HIPAA, HIPAA complying, going to
Yeah,
get you in trouble. It has a
right.
number. It have the number
Perfect.
AB if you've got two people
Yeah.
in a room, but that's all it's got. So that when the
Nice.
nurse sits down to log that information, if she's not going to do it in each room, then
Mhm.
she has what she needs to know to be able to say, yes, I hit these rooms and I gave these XYZ medications. So some simple ways of kind of thinking through your process and ways that you can be able to offload some of the information out of your brain so that
Nice.
it's not having to try to hold all of that in there.
Nice. Now, in terms of spiritual rest, you said that might be faith based. Could you give us some non faith based kind of options for that? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So spiritual rest, as we talked about, is kind of feeling interconnected with groups.
Yeah.
So if you have, let's say, within your hospital or even within your area, like a nurses association, let's say, or
Oh,
some type
nice.
of group where you're maybe meeting virtually right now a couple of times a year or even once a month, where you're able to get with people who understand your day to day lifestyle. Or if you're even able to let's say if there's an organization that you have a heart for and you're spending some time as a volunteer maybe once a week or not even that once a month a couple of times a year that you're feeling like this kind of helps me feel connected to the
Yeah.
community outside of my nursing role. It lets me
Mhm.
be able to kind of give back and to pour back into that. I've seen nurses do missionary trips or
Oh, wow.
humanitarian type work
Nice.
where it's like I feel like I'm giving back to the greater good or part of something bigger because I'm giving a
Yeah.
week or whatever it is into this organization to help do these kind of things. And it's interesting because in doing that you're doing something, you know what I mean? You're
Yeah.
not just sitting on your behind, but
Yeah.
you're connecting in a way that is outside of your normal way of connecting. And that's why a lot
Nice.
of people do experience it through faith-based systems because you're connecting to humanity in a way that's outside of your normal way of doing it.
Very true. Did you have any other ideas or concepts that you wanted to share before we wrap up? I've learned so much about what I need. The examples were great because I had read your article, I read your book a little bit, but I needed the examples to apply the rest. And you've given me all the information that I needed. I feel like I have a project now. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, I would probably say this, one of the things that I hear oftentimes, particularly from people in healthcare, is what do you need? What happens if you need all seven? Because
Yes, I do. I need all I
because
need everything.
yeah,
Everything.
because that's how I was. And when you think about it, we're all using all seven types of energy every day to some level. But most of us, we already have some systems in place for
Mhm,
how we are restoring some of these.
mhm.
However, there are some that of these seven types of rest you may have never even thought about or
I
never heard
didn't.
of or really haven't investigated what strategy you have in place for filling up that bucket for yourself.
Yeah.
And so my thing would be just to kind of be aware
Mhm.
that if you are going to sleep every night and you're getting 5, 6, 7 hours of sleep and you feel like you're getting adequate sleep, but
Mhm.
or you can't even get to sleep well, and you're staying tired despite the sleep, then
Mhm.
it may be one of these other types of rest that you're needing. And to
Gotcha.
really disassociate that thought that rest is simply about stopping because it's
Yeah.
not about just the cessation of activity. It's about doing restorative activities that pour back into the places that you are daily depleting and doing it in a way that doesn't require you to go on vacation, take a
Right.
sabbatical, quit your job, ways that you can incorporate it in the middle of your busy day so that you're constantly filling back up those places that are trying to get depleted.
Nice, Dr. Dalton-Smith. Thank you so much for sharing this. I'm gonna seriously take this to heart. I love the ideas that you gave, the concepts in general, because as nurses, we take care of so many people, and we don't take care of ourselves. And now you've given me some tools that I can use personally and professionally. Thank you so much for taking the time to explain this to us.
Oh,
Really
my
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Thanks for having me.